How many college and university professors have actually taken the time to learn how to teach? Go ahead, take a guess.
I don't like your food.
What did you say?
I said, I don't like your food, and I would like to send it back.
I'll make it simple. Out of 10, how many have done more than an occasional webinar or a summer seminar on pedagogy? That's just a fancy word for I actually care about whether or not people understand what the heck I'm saying.
I'm sorry to hear that. What about my food is not to your liking?
Go ahead, take a guess. Out of 10, how many?
For starters, you've taken the joy out of eating. Every dish you've served tonight has been some intellectual exercise rather than something you want to sit and enjoy.
If you guessed one, just one, then you were being generous.
You're a chef. Your single purpose on this earth is to serve people food that they might actually like, and you have failed.
Because the overwhelming majority of people today teaching in higher education have never learned how to teach. Maybe that's why there's a growing complaint, not just about the expense of higher education, but about its relevancy. Most teachers think that they're equipping their students to fit the real world, and they're giving them exactly what they need. But most students, almost 70%, say, we're not prepared. And by the way, you're not doing a very good job while you're in the classroom.
You failed, and you've bored me.
What happened that people called teachers have actually never learned how to teach?
You're still hungry?
Yes, I am.
How hungry?
Starved.
Well, let's take a look at why this is the case, what people are doing to make it, well, correct it, and what we can do to add to it so that we can get more out of higher education. So tap the like button and let's get into it. Hi, I'm James Callahan, and this is The Do-Over Show. And in my 20 plus years of teaching as an adjunct, before that a tenure track professor for a handful of years, my PhD training, I can tell you that fewer than 1 out of 10 of my colleagues have actually ever spent any more than an hour or two in their entire career learning how they can improve their teaching. Now, I'm not much better, but I've learned my discipline and several other disciplines in order to stay relevant and earned the equivalent of an educational psychology minor as an undergrad. But most today in higher education, most of the people that have taught you in higher education never actually sat on the other side of that desk and learned how it is that they can be better teachers. Now, before all my elementary and secondary education friends chime in that they are really the experts on teaching, there's really an apples and oranges experience, a difference between grade school and high school compared to college and university life. And it's not just pride, although there's a lot of that on the higher ed side. The real difference is these young adults, they're paying for it. And they have different demands than just trying to finish a degree. They have demands of us as professors, as teachers. And they're beginning to ask more and more today as the role of higher education is being questioned. Now, there are good teachers in higher education. The question is, where do they come from and how can we have more of them? Well, they ruin it for the rest of us. I have to tell you this because they're the popular ones. They're the exception. They're the ones who are young, attractive, talk about things like sex and drugs or sex or drugs. And by the way, when you get to be my age, you don't get to talk about those things anymore because it just sounds creepy. So all of these popular professors that use their personality, use their charisma on the college campus, in their department, maybe more broader in a social setting, that is, these people ruin it for the rest of us who are just trying to communicate our information, the hard and soft skills of our field of study to students who want to use these skills in order to join the workforce. And in a recent article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, pretty much the Bible for higher ed, so you should check it out if you're interested in what's actually going on, both on the academic side as well as the administrative side. Its argument is that we're stuck in an old transmission model of education and teaching. That is, the PhD with all of their knowledge pours it into the empty vessel of a student just by lecture, by presenting, making demands of students, making them respond according to those demands on tests and quizzes. Yes, the old transmission model is probably the way you learned most of what you learned. And it worked. It worked for a long time. That is, until students started to act like consumers and actually started to complain. And that led to department chairs recommending to those struggling professors, younger professors, those working through tenure, that probationary period, the first few years of a tenure track's job, you have to improve in every quality, not just getting along with your peers and publishing, but you actually need good student evaluations at most colleges and universities today to get that promotion known as tenure. And one of the gimmicks is to throw a master teacher at a younger, struggling, or forming teacher. All that does is create resentment. All it does is point out that there are a few elites on a campus and that teaching is pretty much the same wherever you are on campus, which fails to recognize the differences in disciplines, the differences in acquiring knowledge and the way that knowledge is supposed to be used to represent proficiency within those disciplines. Yeah, it builds resentment on a very personal level too, because once you get a master teacher that comes in and everybody knows it, it's not secret. And when everybody knows it, everyone knows you're not a good teacher. So answer number one to why teachers can't teach is because, well, they never learned how. They were never asked how. It was never expected of them. It was never assumed that that's something that you had to devote your entire career to. Hey, but that doesn't help solve the problem. That just diagnoses it. Back to that article in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, here are the suggestions. Most of the time, people in higher education who are struggling with their teaching attend every webinar or session they can, and they pick and choose what they're going to. They're very eclectic. It's like a salad bar. They just pick something like, I can do that in my class, and they try one thing rather than the course of action that makes those one or two things actually work in the discipline in which they're teaching. It's more than knowing generic teaching tactics that can apply to every and any discipline, because more and more research is showing us that teaching in different disciplines needs to differ because of the proficiency and the competencies that are expected within those disciplines. So teaching biology to use in a major or in another class as a prerequisite is different than teaching a gen ed requirement or teaching in a field of the humanities like religious studies or philosophy. See, each of those fields has its own hard skills and soft skills associated with basic literacy and functionality within those degrees. Yes, so it's not just that a teacher can teach anywhere, it's that different types of majors, different types of tracks of learning, even in STEM, are influenced by models of teaching that are adopted in the instructional. And what complicates this even further is that we are called upon to adapt and adjust in each class with 10, 20, 50 more students to each individual student's learning styles, background, disposition, what interests them. That is, it is so overwhelming for most trying to teach that they just pick one thing, usually their personality, and they just go with it. And not all of us have the most engaging personalities. So what can we do? Well, let me start with the students. Students can give teachers a break. Yes, it's the student's job to actually work at acquiring knowledge in a cooperative relationship with the professor. It's not that you just sit back and say, do biology to me, but rather you put yourself in a mode where you are going to work just as hard as the professor is supposed to be working on that teaching and learning relationship. That itself, along with where you sit in the classroom. I know some of you just aren't bold enough to sit in the front row bright and smiley on the first day of class. No, most of us who are struggling and who are not ready to become real learners as students, we hide in the back in the group. If you want better success, I hate to tell you this, but studies show that people who sit in the middle or in the first few rows are usually in the line of sight of the professor more often. And as long as your head is up and you're not scrolling through TikTok during class and you nod along with what the professor's doing as you take notes, okay, and you do that, you will have, I hate to tell you this, you'll have a better chance of getting a better grade in that class just because you decided to show up, speak up, and sit in a place where the prof could see you. I know it doesn't seem fair. You should just have to do the knowledge and not have to expose yourself vulnerably to the whole experience of higher education. But the socialization of higher education tends to influence professors. They're human beings too. If you hand in a written assignment and they can't understand, they can't decipher your scribbling, your grade will be lower. If you hand it in neatly typed, margins, whatever, your grade will tend to be higher than somebody who hands in something that's handwritten and just scribbled out. Yes, because profs are human beings too. That means that the right kind of confidence from a student is correlated with consistently higher grades. Not just by anecdote, by empirical studies. And it happens at every level of education. Some of the best studies these days are showing that confidence is especially important in STEM and hard skill coursework, where you just thought things were objective and an answer was an answer. No, the right kind of confidence tends to give you a higher performance on a grade scale within a class. Now for my professional teacher friends, stop taking each and every webinar and course and summer seminar that you can and just picking and choosing things. Pick one and stick with it. Let me give you an example of one of the most go-to resources, a user's guide to a peer teaching model. That's all the rage today. That's what we're looking at. And if you can exemplify some of these practices, you'll at least get some slack cut to you by your department chair and by your dean. One of the best first steps in peer instruction was written by someone named Eric Mazer, called Peer Instruction, a User's Manual. Catchy title, right? Yeah, I'll leave a link to it in the description below, but please don't buy the book. It's obscenely expensive. Get it through interlibrary loan like you do all your other books. So in the midst of a traditional transmission model of instruction, this peer instruction model turns the tables and engages the students. That is, they're given like a game show, a multiple choice. Some actually use like clickers that register through the software that they use in class, where you go through a description. Here's a question, here's a problem we're solving. Here are the 4 choices you have, A, B, C, D. Now pick one, click. Now talk about it in small groups. Each of you talk about why the option you chose was the option you chose. Why didn't you choose the other options? And then you get a chance to vote again. Did you change your mind? Did that kind of peer instruction influence the way you thought and answered the question? Now, if you're thinking, that's great when you're trying to interpret what a flower or an urn means in a piece of poetry, but what about STEM? I teach real things. I teach science. Even in those classes, and maybe especially in those classes, peer instruction leads to higher responsiveness, better engagement, and better results, better test scores for those standardized prereq classes that you're sure are just grounded in objectivity and nature. That is, just like teachers who never learned to teach and may not know how, students have not yet learned how to learn. That is, we can't make that assumption. We have to give them an experience of the learning process. And focusing on that as a teacher will get you more engagement with your students than any other little trick that we can pick up from a webinar or seminar. And by the way, maybe they don't like that they have to take the course that you're teaching. I know, blows your mind, right? But don't they know this is the most important thing? Remember the first day of class when you took all of these required courses and every single professor tried to prove to you how the world would be a better place, we'd reach utopia, if everybody just took this one course seriously and their specialty, their devotion and studying and academia would just transform the world and make everybody healthy, wealthy, and wise? Yeah, we're beyond those days. And one course is not going to change someone's life. If it did for you, congratulations, something clicked. But for most students, especially if they have to be in a required course, they don't want to be there. And it's an uphill battle to get them engaged so that they actually want to learn what it is you're teaching. There's a friend of mine who chose a grad school program, was admitted to a great PhD program that bragged about itself, that they were preparing the world's best teachers through their PhD program. So this person expected to go in there with all these webinars and seminars and coaching and interacting and practice teaching. And now this person has turned into an awesome teacher, but not because the school actually spent any time or energy or required anything of them. They just bragged that they were preparing the world's best teachers because they were going to teach everybody the subject that they chose. That is, we're going to teach this subject. We're going to know everything about this subject. And that's what will make us the world's best teachers. And you know, and I know, and every student knows that's not the way it works. Oh, and a little hint, if you want some cover while you work through your teaching, all you have to do is attend a webinar with the keyword or buzzword, active learning. If you throw that out, if you just drop that the next meeting of your department, or if you even mention that to students, you'll say, you know, I took a webinar and I was looking closely at active learning. You'll win yourself a lot of grace, a lot of leeway in your department at your university. Just throw a buzzword or two out and people will give you time to actually figure out what things like active learning are. And research and researchers are just getting started. Yes, after all this time, they're just getting started in studying evidence-based ways of evaluating different approaches to teaching, different teaching models, active learning, peer instruction, and even modifications of the transmission model. One of the best ways the transmission model has been adapted by professors who have a personality to do this is they either become storytellers, that is, everything has a story, beginning, middle, and end, associated with the presentation in the transmission model of knowledge. The other way is that some profs have actually become like stand-up comedians, and they entertain in a way and they interact in short bites in a way that students tend to consume entertainment today. Now, I know, you are not there to be entertaining. You're there to be serious because this is world-changing stuff. I get it. But communicating in means that are engaging will win you an opportunity with students who otherwise wouldn't give you the time of day. Oh, and by the way, when I'm teaching those courses that I'm required courses as an adjunct, I usually start by saying, look, you have to be here. You probably don't want to. I'm here for the money. So let's find a way to make this work for both of us. The goal, whether it's to reach as a prerequisite to make them ready for the next class, explain to them. I do it all the time. The reason why we're going to be learning this and this rather than that is because this is a prerequisite for this next course. And if you're in this major, you have to take it. So let's get you to that next course. Or I explain to them, this is where this information might become useful. You might see it again at work, in life, or in another discipline. And knowing that in the class gives them a reason why they have to study something that they just don't want to study. So what would you add? Not just in models of teaching, but in your own discipline, what would you add are the critical factors in helping people who were never taught to be teachers, but are called teachers, to actually become better teachers? Please leave some ideas in the comments below, because that will help all of us keep this conversation going. And thanks for being part of the Do-Over Show. Please, while you're down there leaving a comment, could you tap the like button, because it really helps. And how about you subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode. I'm so glad you found me, and I found you. Thanks.